This presentation is provided by BoardPack LLC for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The opinions expressed by the presenters are their own and not necessarily those of BoardPack. On behalf of BoardPack, we welcome you to today's webinar. BoardPack has teamed up with Amazon's #1 best-selling author in board governance, Thomas Bakewell, and fundraising guru Carol Weisman to help educate boards on the latest industry trends. The Boardroom webinar series will focus on different topics each month through the end of 2015. I wanted to mention really quickly that BoardPack is a secure, affordable, and easy-to-use paperless board meeting solution. Users can access materials from the native iPad app or through a web browser on other devices. Private annotations, minutes builder, and unlimited document storage are a few highlights of what we have to offer. Before we jump into today's topic, let me tell you a little bit about today's speakers. Thomas Bakewell works to bring out the best your team has to offer. He is the author of the book, Claiming Your Place at the Boardroom Table. Over the past 30 years, Thomas Bakewell has advised and directed CEOs and presidents of large for-profit and nonprofit corporations. His vast board experience has made him a leader and go-to source in board governance. Carol Weisman, president of Board Builders, is an internationally known speaker, author, trainer, and consultant. Carol specializes in volunteerism, fundraising, and governance. Carol won a Telly Award for her PBS special, Building a Board with a Passion for Mission. Her board experience is vast, having served on 38 boards and served as president of 7. Carol and Tom, take it away.
So, Tom.
Good morning. How are you today?
Fabulous.
And what is our topic today?
One of my absolutely favorite topics, and that's how to get your board involved in fundraising.
And the good news is, you know a lot about it. The good news is also we could be here all day. So we're going to keep this tight because you have a wealth of information.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you a lot of questions.
Got it. Let's go.
We've got the expert. Carol Weisman is on the scene. Before you turn that slide, though, I've got a question right up top there. It says fundraising basics for U.S.-based nonprofits. So what's it? Does it not work internationally with fundraising? Are we really trying to narrow the field or what? Give me an answer here.
Here's the deal. In the U.S., we expect our board members to raise money, not outside the U.S. And one of the challenges outside of the U.S., and I've worked in many countries, is they went U.S. results without U.S. techniques.
So just as an example, just trivia, it's only been in the last few years that British universities have started to raise money.
Absolutely.
The opera in Britain has started to raise money. Okay, so they have different systems in different worlds. So this is really focused today for the U.S., and I also noticed the topic was about getting your board members, but here you say at the bottom, the plight of the not-for-profit leader. Link those two together.
It's both the problem of the senior leadership on the board and the senior staff leadership.
So whose job is it to raise money?
Everyone's.
Okay, so tell me about that.
Well, fundraising was more difficult than ever before. When I started my business in 1994, there were 750,000 nonprofits. Now there are 1.6 million.
It's an easy way to make good money, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
And churches still get the largest percentage of our charitable giving. And I want you to tell that wonderful story about your fabulous daughter, Catherine.
Oh, yeah. Well, we all have a good story or two, and here's mine. We just got back from Parents' Weekend at college, so this goes way back. But when she was a tiny little tyke, she was very excited. We got a new puppy, and she was off to her nice little faith-based school. And it was going to be show and tell day, and here she is in the car with her backpack walking to the door. And we got a little bichon frise, so she's saying bichon frise, so she could remember. So the morning starts, and then the teacher says, okay, show and tell. And her hand goes up, and the teacher says, well, what do you want to tell us about Catherine? And she says, we have a new puppy. And the teacher says, what kind is it? And she goes, I think he's a Presbyterian. So that story got back to us from the good Lutheran teacher. And thereafter, Chester was known as Chester the Presbyterian. So that's enough for my story.
So if you want to raise money, throw in a religious...
Now, before we move on here about churches, why do they get so much money? I mean, it's a silly question.
It's not a silly question. 2 reasons.
Yeah.
Number one, very few nonprofits offer eternal salvation.
Okay.
And the second is that many religions, you go weekly.
Okay.
And so a lot of my clients will say, oh, we're going to ask a second or a third time this year. Churches ask every week.
They ask every week. Very interesting
Absolutely.
point. So what about number 3? You have to look beyond your hometown for revenue.
Absolutely. I always have that fantasy that I'm going to get this wonderful call from one of my clients yelling at me, Carol, I don't know what to do. Our server crashed because of euro conversions. And so, in fact, I give to friends of mine who live in Australia. I give to friends of mine in Vietnam. I give to my friends' children who are doing mission trips in Rwanda. I have relatives in D.C., every place. So
if you don't watch it,
Yeah.
I'm going to give your address and your phone number. You're going to get a few more calls about
That's
giving.
fine.
Because I
That's
do know
fine.
you're very charitable minded.
And the other thing is, my mother used to say, not speaking about Chester the Presbyterian, but she used to say, every dog has its day. And I think there is a cycle to fundraising. And we've just seen it with ALS.
The famous
Yes.
water bucket challenge.
Ice Bucket Challenge. It was a...
Good for one season, wasn't it?
And that's it.
What happened? Tell us.
It went viral, and they raised a lot of money. They raised $110 million, which sounds like a lot of money. But if you look at it in context, to bring a drug to market is between $1 and $2 billion.
There you go.
So if you're really looking for cure, this is unfortunately seed money. If you're looking for helping people, it's a lot. But so ALS had its day in the sun.
And now they're on to the next thing, and they're scrambling, thinking they're going to have it again. And
no, they don't think that.
Okay.
They're smart people.
They're smart people. Very good. Good for them. Give us
Here-
some stats here.
Well, here is something I suggest you try with your board, because what happens is you get in the boardroom, and whatever city you're in,
Go to the foundation. Go to the foundation. Go to the corporate foundation.
Absolutely. And so we happen to be in St. Louis, so it's Boeing, it's
Monsanto.
It's the usual suspects, whatever town you're in. And it's the usual suspects in terms of people, too. So every time I work in Atlanta, it's always Tyler Perry.
Right.
And if it's the Jewish community in LA, it's always Steven Spielberg. In Chicago, it used to be Oprah. But in fact, the money is given by individuals. And if you look at these numbers, you realize that bequests are people putting their charity in their will, that dead people give more than corporations.
So when you say bequest, as in I leave in my will
Yes.
to Carol Weisman or to my spouse or to my best friend all my money or to my favorite charity.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and so dead people give more than corporations. And also, fundraising is a process. This is a common misunderstanding. People take it as a transaction.
Let me give you an example of this that might fit into what you're talking about. So I've worked with a number of charities in the last decade, like you have. You're the sweet spot on fundraising and the guru of it. I'm more of the nuts and bolts operations, but I've run into a lot of, for example, colleges that have stopped doing annual funds. And I'm like, what are you thinking? And I know what's going on. They hit a budget crisis. They got to kind of reserve their funds. They got to be careful with their spending. And they say, well, we're going to spend our money on planned giving. On the big gifts, we're not going to spend our money on the annual fund. So what's wrong with that, and how does that relate to this slide here? I see it's a pyramid.
Yeah, it's all about keeping the pipeline going.
Gotcha.
And this is, they call it development, not quickie.
Okay.
And the reason they do is because it's not a quick fix. It's not standing in the middle of the road with a can. This is a long-term relationship, and you develop a relationship over years.
And so from my business operations side, it's also very important you have great processes.
Absolutely. And it has to keep going. And so basically you want a visitor or a student or patient, whoever your target audience is, to have a great first experience, and then to continue to give, become an annual donor, eventually give perhaps a major gift or a planned gift.
Right. Okay. So this is really interesting. You're giving us, 10 truths here?
Yeah.
And I'm going to have to push on you on a couple of these because some of these are a little cryptic. From only a guru like yourself can we really get it so quick. So no one joins a nonprofit because it's a great opportunity to fundraise. Well, duh.
Yeah, well, and
there's probably an exception or two,
there
but I never heard of it.
There are.
Give us one.
Well, I know one guy who loves to fundraise, and that's what he likes to do on boards. He was bullied for his lunch money, and so now he's wealthy and he bullies others, but he's very good at it. But in fact, a lot of nonprofit insiders, whether it's board or staff, think people know when they get on the board that they're going to be expected to fundraise. And I think the one thing that confuses people is the word foundation.
Okay. Oh,
So-
we have lots of money. We're going to give it away, right?
Yes. So
Okay.
my job as a board member for my community foundation is to make a decision where the money's going.
Yeah.
They have no idea that their job is also to bring in money.
That's the easy part. You know, spending is the easy part. Raising it's the hard part. Tell us more. Number 2.
You can be a great fundraiser without ever asking for money.
Now that's a little. Give me a twist on that one. What's that mean? You just
What
show
simple
up.
thing?
What's that
No,
mean?
no.
You give them names. You give them numbers. What do you do?
All of that.
Put a hit out on somebody? Come on.
Well, yeah, you can do that, but only after a planned gift has been made.
Okay.
We have to be judicious there. But in fact, just thanking a donor can raise your donor retention rate from around 50% to up to 92%.
So let me get this straight. So somebody comes in and gives the first nice gift. They started out giving $25. After a year or two, they give you $1,000, and somebody on the board calls them up or sends them a note and says thank you.
And I prefer making a call because it's
Okay.
two-way conversation. And I'll give you a quick example.
Sure.
One of my clients, I train a lot of physicians in how to fundraise. One of the physicians who said he was not going to ask for money, and I told him that was fine. He called a donor. I wrote a script for him. It said, "Hello, this is Dr. So-and-so. This is not a medical emergency. I want to thank you for your gift." And then the next part was, "Can I ask you why you gave the gift?" And the guy said, "I'm a physicist, and I know you use robotics, and I was working with my grandson on a 6th grade robotics contest.
Very cool.
And so I just thought I'd send in a contribution." And this brilliant doctor, who turned out to be my A-plus student, said, "On Saturday, I'm going to be teaching interns
As in medical school interns.
well, they're past medical
Right.
school, but
Yeah.
they're
Okay.
interns. Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to be teaching them how to operate on a Purdue frozen chicken using a Da Vinci robot. And would you and your grandson like to come?"
Oh, that's phenomenal. And there's an instant link and the next gift falling out of the tree.
And
Yeah.
just to cut the story short, they're going to be buying a robot.
There you go.
And
Which
$1 million.
is what, $1 million a pop? Sure.
He and
absolutely.
2 colleagues.
Yeah, because his grandson thought it was cool. Yeah.
No, because he thought it was cool.
There you go. Okay, so what's this? Time is not money. I don't get that.
Oh.
You're really gone. Everybody knows time is money. What?
No, it's not.
All right.
Okay, if the nonprofit needs to go to Office Max to buy paper, can they go in and say, we have great board members and they give a lot of time? Doesn't fly. Time is important. Money is important. It's not one or the other.
Okay, so you got to have both.
Absolutely.
Okay, rich people don't raise money and give it to poor people to spend. Well, what's that all about? Lots of people need money. Come on.
Absolutely. And here's the fantasy, is that we're going to have a fundraising board and a governance board.
Okay.
And it happens in a few situations, but only when the people who are raising the money are very similar to the people who are spending the money. So you find this in faith-based organization, Jewish charities, the Lutheran charities, that sort of thing.
So tight-knit families or tribes or whatever.
Absolutely,
choice,
where you have the same,
communities.
where you have the same values.
Right.
So having the idea that somebody's going to raise a whole bunch of money and give it to the board and let them decide
Right.
whether you earned it, married it, or inherited it.
It's mostly a fantasy.
Absolutely.
Okay. No one ever died from fundraising. Now, I know some people would argue that with you, but the bottom line is it can actually be pretty exciting when you learn how to do it and you have your first, hit.
Well, I think you can get weak at the knees, you can throw up, but I have a niece who's an actuary who has not found a death from fundraising. So, it's not fun being rejected. It's awful.
Yeah.
But if you didn't have a good enough dating experience and don't know how awful it is, try fundraising. But you recover from it.
Yeah.
And when someone says yes,
It's very exciting.
it's heaven.
Yeah, it's very exciting. Okay. Number 6, the work of the staff is to make the board more efficient. Boy, do I believe in that. Tell me more.
Well, tell me why you believe in it.
Because I'm a big believer that boards, it's probably, you got to have one or two things to raise money in my simple economy. You got to either have a board that's willing to get out and ask, or you got to have a CEO that loves to do it, is good at doing it, and spends 50 to 70% of their time doing it. And usually you don't have either of those in large quantities. So what you're saying is your board in most not-for-profits and most charities is their connection to the real world, and they are the ones that actually have to be willing to go knock on the door and make the ask.
Yeah, and it's a peer-to-peer situation frequently.
Gotcha. The most common reason people don't give is they aren't asked. That's the truth. Tell me more.
Well, I was at an AFP meeting, which is the Association for Fundraising Professionals, and a woman who was sitting a few rows in front of me raised her hand and said, I'm president of this board, and I can't figure out why we can't get people to give money. And I sat about 3 rows behind, and I raised my hand, and I said, I can tell you why.
Right.
And the person who was speaking said, well, Carol, why don't you answer this one?
You want to get up here and tell us?
Yeah,
Come on,
and I
shot.
said, and here's what I said. Yeah. I gave you people a gift in 1990.
Yeah.
It was a lifetime membership. My husband is involved with your organization for the next 25 years, right. And you've never asked again.
For another dime, yeah.
No.
And I can match you with a story, if you don't mind, very quickly here. And this one's a painful one for me. I'll leave the details out in terms of association and all, but I'm very plugged into one of these communities we're talking about. And it's a phenomenal organization, but it's struggling on the fundraising side, and which means it's struggling overall. And in fact, it's struggling so much, one of the bankers reached out to me, not one of their bankers that wants to give them money, but one of the bankers who's already loaned them a lot of money and says, why can't they raise money? And I said, leaving the details out, well, let me give you one example. My name is B, so I'm at the top of the list. My name begins with B. I'm at the top of the list, Bakewell. I am intimately involved in the community. I'm told they had an annual fund, but nobody ever asked me. And, I can't find anything on the website about the annual fund. And literally, being, loving this community, after I met with the banker, I went and sent a check. And I found out, there's a big annual banquet next week. And I had no knowledge of it. And this isn't my fault. Maybe I don't read my email very well or whatever, but they were missing a bet there. And if they're not doing it with me, what about the people with X, Y, and Z? So
are there richer people than you?
Yeah, believe me, I have a little capacity, but believe me, there is a lot deeper pockets there. Number 8, the work of the development or fundraising committee is not to do all the work, but make sure it gets done. That's pretty straightforward, but tell us more.
Well, it's really that simple. A lot of people don't want to join the development committee because they think, I
got to make 50 calls a week.
Yeah, and also the other people think, I'm on the finance or the program committee, so I don't have to do any fundraising.
Exactly.
Ding dong, you're wrong.
Ding dong, the witch is dead, you're wrong. Okay, speaking of, what number are we on here?
9.
Number 9. Every board member has their own kryptonite and will lose their power and talent. It's not well used. I think I have a feeling for what you're talking about there. So my kryptonite is... we'll save what mine is. What do you mean here?
Well, basically, you can, number 1, board members are not ATMs.
Right.
The second thing is some people, I call it that 10-ticket fantasy. Mm-hmm. And what happens in the boardroom is someone says, if everyone sells 10 tickets,
right.
And that is not going to happen.
And one person can sell 100 tickets.
Exactly.
And the other person might not sell any of them.
But that one person who can't sell any ticket, because they're shy, they just moved to town, whatever the situation is, that person may be able to handle all of your operations for your auction to make sure it runs smoothly.
Sure. And let me break that down a little bit more with another quick example. So the prior question, we talked about committees. A classic problem that I've run into in the operations side of organizations, you have a board member that never shows up. They're a name kind of person, but they're also the person, if you want to know the 20 people in town, they're the one to call, and they will do the work. They just don't have time to come to the meetings. What do you do with that person?
Number 1, you take them off your board.
Okay, what do you do? What's that mean?
And
how do you keep them plugged in?
You keep them plugged in by calling them and saying, how would you like to communicate? There are all kinds of names for those board members, such as emeritus, not names that other people are thinking perhaps, but leadership council members. And sometimes I'll ask someone who is very busy, very prominent, or very tied up, can I have 2 hours of your time a year?
Right.
That's
so
all I
you
want.
use their sweet spot, you use their kryptonite, and you put a lead shield around it, except when you need it. So,
Absolutely.
okay,
I use
very
them
good.
effectively.
Okay, the best fundraisers are the best listeners, so I'm going to shut up and listen. What do you have to tell me?
I think the movement today is to tell people stories. There are all these stories telling conversations and meetings, and I think stories are important. But when you go to a major donor, what's important is not your story; it's the donor story.
Boy, have I seen this go bad too. It really is shut up and listen. In the law profession, when I did my early years of training, they used to have an expression: plead lean. Keep it tight and to the point. Same thing here.
Absolutely.
Okay. So what about mistakes? Another list. What are some of the mistakes? Let's get.
These
right
are all
into
mistakes
them.
I've made.
We've all made them.
Yeah,
Come on,
really.
Let's go. What's our first?
First mistake.
First mistake here. What do you think? Okay. So clearly spell out your expectations of your board when it comes to fundraising. Okay, so this one charity I was telling you about, the board members aren't required to give money. I mean, like any.
Yeah, and they don't.
And they don't.
No.
Yeah.
So you need a clear expectation, and there are a lot of ways to say it. And sometimes it's a number like $50 or $100,000 or a membership at this level. Sometimes it's a phrase. I worked with a wonderful group of Catholic women. I just adored them. And they said they wanted a sacrificial gift. And I just had this fantasy of a dead teenager.
A lamb or what? A teenager?
Goat
Yeah, okay.
winding up on their doorstep. But we expect a gift that's meaningful for you. And then one group that I'm working with now is doing something very interesting. And you have to be a group that people really want to join to do this, but they expect $50,000, give or get, and at least $10,000 has to be new money.
Yeah, so just a trivia question on that. You're talking about board members.
Yes.
What about the argument, then, does that mean only rich people on our board?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
And it really depends. That doesn't mean you don't need the voice. Mm-hmm. And there are many ways to get the voice of, quote, the people.
Yeah.
And you need mechanisms and committees and a lot of ways. But it depends on the purpose of the board.
Yeah. So you're talking about it's okay for a board to be focused on high-end people and high-end fundraising. And I'm going to push the story on the other side of that. Their problem, this unknown charity, unnamed charity, is that they've got a group of board members who like to be in charge but won't lift a finger to raise money, and the problem is not going to be resolved until somebody gets busy and decides we're going to raise money.
I call that the people problem, and the reason I say that is one of my sons, when I ask him, do you want to come to dinner on Saturday, he always says, I'll have my people get back to your people.
I see.
And
your son has no people.
And I have no people.
Okay, very good.
And so
that's a nice way to say no, Mom.
No, he frequently will call and say yes.
Okay.
I assume he's calling someone else to see if he gets a better offer. But a lot of wealthy people have people, and a lot of nonprofits don't have people.
Gotcha.
So we should do this,
The
meaning
board has
you.
the board has to get you to the people and to the person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. The most common reason people don't give, let's hear the drum roll. Okay.
Is they haven't been asked, and some people don't know when they've been asked.
Yeah. So, the story I wasn't asked that I just told, but what about this? They don't know they've been asked. Well, you mean they haven't heard it in their language or what?
All of it. And sometimes it's a one-on-one. And so there's a mass ask, and the assumption is, oh, she's in the room. She has more money. She'll give. He'll give.
She heard. Yeah.
Yeah. And I go to a faith-based retreat center, and they were talking every single lunch about the annual campaign. And I sat down with one of the people and said, are you going to give? And she said, to what? And I said, the annual campaign.
What campaign?
What campaign? Yeah. And I said, they've been asking at lunch every day. Oh.
Yeah.
You mean they wanted us to give? And
just,
I thought, yeah.
And just for the record, this charity that I'm kind of dinging here, they probably, I was probably in a room or two when it was mentioned, but,
if you don't say,
yo,
you, Bakewell,
wake
you,
up. Write
Tom
Bakewell.
Bakewell.
Get your checkbook out. Okay, I get the picture. Okay. So you have successful people on your board, and hopefully you do. Don't that set them up for failure? So what's that mean?
Well, when you teach a child to swim, at least in my experience, you don't throw them in the water and walk away. Mm-hmm. And that's what happens.
Okay.
They expect people to go out with absolutely zero training, and they sink like a rock.
Yeah.
And that happened to me when I started fundraising.
Yeah, and I had similar experiences in my early years. First time I went out fundraising as well.
And you'd never...
It doesn't have to be that way, does it?
It doesn't. You need to... And my question to many of the nonprofit boards I work with is, how are you training your board in fundraising?
Right.
And it's like...
Okay. Well, let's get on. How do you make fundraising a part of your annual board retreat? That's a good idea. So what are we looking at? Here we go. I'm sorry, folks, I'm getting ahead of you. What kind of training and education are board and staff getting in fundraising? So that's a fundamental source. What are the sources here to get some great training?
Tons of it.
Okay. Tick off 2 or 3, right?
Webinars, Association of Fundraising Professionals. There's the Planned Giving Council if you're looking to give, have planned gifts. Lilly Endowment is amazing. They're in Indiana, and they have the wonderful Lilly School of Philanthropy. And private consultants will train your board and staff, people like myself and you.
And there's nobody better than you at it. So let me cycle through these again very quickly. So the Association of Fundraising Professionals, the vast majority of the people that are fundraising professionals, whether it's a major university or a small charity, belong to what's called the AFP, and many of these people, many cities have really active associations or chapters of this, so don't miss them. The Planned Giving Council, that's usually the estate planners, either the insurance agents or the CPAs, or again the planned giving people of the major organizations. So they're very specialized, but you can find them without looking too hard. They're usually in every community, and they're also linked to the community foundations and things lots of times.
Absolutely.
Lilly, of course, is the 500-pound gorilla with the reputation. And there are actually a lot of other universities that have great programs, but they're the high watermark. And then again, when it comes to private consultants, there's nobody better than Carol teaching you how to ask.
I think what any private consultant can do is customize.
Very good.
Rather than giving
and
you
that's
general.
the key point, customize. Okay, and so here we are about making it part of your annual board retreat. So obviously most great organizations, most boards should at a minimum have an annual retreat, talk strategy, etc., but you also want to talk about fundraising, and it's a great time to get training. Talk to me about this. What does this look like? Just an example.
Well, this is my fantasy of a board retreat.
Well,
I've never actually been I've worked extensively in Bermuda, and it never even looked like that there.
And you never got to the ocean because you were in a hotel room.
No. Okay. I don't know how many trips.
We know how much fun you are. So tell me anyway, though, what's this look like at a board? Give me just 1 or 2 recent examples where you've worked for annual retreats where you've helped the board, basics, high level, what?
All of the above, and this is where the customization comes in. I worked with a board in Boston, and about 65% of the board had gone to Harvard. There were some riffraff from MIT. This was a really smart board.
Don't get personal now.
Yeah, well, and so one of the guys said, now this was a complex nonprofit, and he was a surgeon, and he said, I'm not really sure what we do. We have so many programs. And I said, how long have you been on the board? He said, just 3 years. This is a really smart guy. Mm-hmm. So you have to know what you're selling. You cannot sell what you don't know. Okay. So you need the case for giving.
So what was the fix in his situation? Yeah, the Boston organization with the Brainiac, MD, PhD, whatever.
Right. I called him before, and that's what he said to me on the phone. And so we broke them into teams, and we had a quiz. Do we do this? Do we still do it? How much?
So you got some focus going for the organization.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And people kept saying, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
And the staff were cringing.
Right.
They were absolutely having a meltdown. How could they not know that? And then we talked about different ways they could get involved in fundraising. And as you said, some people are major connectors. And we're going to go on to the next slide.
Okay.
And so,
talk about connection. Understand what fundraising is and what it's not. So break it down really simply. You got a lot of words here.
We're going to stay at this one.
Okay.
So basically, it is connecting with people, with mission, and communicating what you're doing, and also asking people's opinion.
Okay.
There's an old adage: if you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money.
And there's a lot of truth to that. Now, give an example of that. So we said that. Say that again slowly and give an example of that.
If you ask for advice, you get money.
Right.
If you ask for money, you get advice. And this is a for-profit example, more in your world. My nephew called me, and he has His name's Kevin Bachhuber, and he's an urban cricket farmer.
He has crickets.
Yes.
Okay.
For
right
human
up there
consumption.
with worms, right?
No, this is for human consumption.
Okay.
And so he calls me and he said, Aunt Carol, he asked me a question. How do you get booked to speak? Mm-hmm. How do you get paid to speak? He's already spoken in Brussels and all over the world. He's been covered by Bloomberg News. He's done a TED Talk. And I said...
On crickets?
Yes.
Okay, just checking.
As a protein source.
All right.
And so first thing I said is, Kevin, I'm taking you to the National Speakers Association.
Great.
So he asked me a question, and I put the money on the table.
You put it on the table.
We're going to make this happen.
Just one other technical question. Do they grind them up, or do you have to eat them whole?
It's your choice.
Okay.
And like anything else in the world, it's best to eat fat fried.
Right. Okay, so tell me what we got here. The 4 steps in fundraising. They look pretty basic. Donor ID, cultivation, the ask, and stewardship. Do they always have to be in that order?
No.
All right.
Sometimes this happens all the time, and you always hear these stories. We never heard of her, but she left us $50,000 or $100,000 in our will. How did this happen? We don't know.
Right. But
somehow you were in their consciousness.
Right.
Some organizations don't need a donor identification program, and the reason is that your lovely daughter goes to High Point. Well, they know the names of all the graduates. Right. They know the names. They have your number.
They have great processes.
Absolutely.
The first time I walked on the campus, they asked me for money.
Yep.
They did.
Yep.
Really. And some people are offended by that, and some people say they're doing their job.
If you come back in 50 years, they will still ask you to come.
Very good. Okay.
For some organizations, especially rare diseases, where you can't get the names of people with the diseases, although Facebook is making a big difference in that, because there are groups. But it's difficult to find out who cares about a rare disease like hemophilia, like Usher's disease, which is blindness and deafness. All these kinds of diseases. You don't know who really cares about them. So donor identification is a more difficult process than a university or a hospital.
Cultivation, is that something that happens fast or short or everything in between or all the above?
Depends on your relationship with the mission.
Yeah.
So if you have a child in a school that you love, whether it's a Catholic school or a Lutheran school or public school, you know about it every single day because they come home happy or sad.
Right.
And so if you want to be a part of their school foundation.
Okay.
If it's something that's not a part of your daily life, let's say something horrendous like human trafficking,
right,
and you hear a story about it on the news, you may not think about it the next day. And so the cultivation process is more involved.
Okay, and I think we can figure out what the ask is. That's just simply saying...
Yep, it's asking for money.
Okay, very good.
And the 4th step is stewardship, and that's thanking people. And that's the easiest thing, and it's done the worst.
All right, well, let's start with that. What do you mean by stewardship in terms of thanking? What does this mean you start with stewardship?
Well, a lot of board members are afraid to ask for money, and I respect that. When I first started asking for money, I used to get really sick, and I'd get a headache, and it was not pretty. So having your board members dip their toes in the fundraising waters and simply thank current board donors is a great way to get going in the process.
It can really plug them into the value of the organization or what the mission is, or I've had that experience.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And then the big bucks are never in special events.
Well, then why do we do so many special events, or is that trend changing?
It's not changing, but it is not the only go-to place. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing wrong with special events, and I'm working on a book called Beyond the Napkin, is that we need to tell people during the year how their money was spent. Okay. And so that when we invite them again, it winds up being 51st dates. Okay. So, I have clients who make $750,000 from an event. That's not chump change.
Yes, that's serious money.
That's serious money. But that could just be the tip of the iceberg if they play their cards right.
Okay, so they get the big donors and they give them the same rubber chicken dinner every year for 50 years instead of going deeper.
Right.
Okay.
So here's one of the things I see at a lot of smaller nonprofits. Okay. Is when you're fundraising, don't compare apples and oranges.
Okay, so if I'm a small little
family
very
and
smart
children's
local family and children,
whatever,
and the university down the street's knocking down $100 million a year.
Yep.
I shouldn't be trying to model exactly what they're doing or using the same techniques.
Exactly. You have to have the right techniques for the right size organizations.
Okay.
And so it drives me insane when I was in a meeting just 2 weeks ago, and a gentleman said, well, I went to Stanford, and when we have our reunions, there's always someone assigned to our class who is involved in fundraising. And I said, how many fundraisers do you think there are at Stanford?
At least 200, and I'm probably way shy.
You're way, way, way shy.
Yeah.
This
Probably
organization,
one at the business school probably has 200. Yeah.
I said, this organization has 2.
Yeah.
So what works for one will not necessarily work for the next.
Yeah, and then a point I would make here that I'm going to make it a question. No matter what approach you use, you have to make your case.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You have to know if you're an apple or an orange.
Okay, very good.
Every fundraising strategy needs to have both a heart and a head number. And I call this the Anne Frank School of Fundraising.
Okay.
And the reason is that for a number of years, Anne Frank's book, The Diary of Anne Frank, was the most sold and translated book in the world.
In the world, sure.
In the world. And it was actually above the Bible at that time.
I believe that. No, absolutely.
And what made it so poignant is nobody can get their heads around the death of 6 million people.
Right.
But one child's story made sense.
Right.
But you have to then extrapolate.
Mm-hmm.
So you can either start with one client and then say, there are 50,000 children in our city just like Geneva.
Right.
Or you can start with, we have 50,000 children or 10,000 or 5,000 who go to bed hungry every night. I want to tell you about Antoine.
Okay.
So it has to be both.
Something that the people can take in. So what about this if you don't have a strategy that involves individuals? Why not? Yeah. So you got to do it one-on-one. You got to get right to the individuals sooner or later, whether it's a big message or in one person-to-person call.
Well, Tom, that's where the money is.
That's where the money
that
is.
we went through that slide a while back, but that's where the money is.
Okay. Now, what do you mean here with these pictures? I'm a little slow here. If you only take one thing away from this talk, what is it?
Call a donor every morning. Call 2 donors every morning when you first get in, and call 2 donors every night, whether you're board or staff.
Everybody.
No, this is just for 1 or 2 people who like to use the phone.
Okay.
And say, I just want to call you. This is Carol Weisman.
I'm not asking. I'm just checking in. I'm giving you a report on your money, whatever.
I want to let you know either we have a triumph or we have a problem. Mm-hmm. And just want to keep you in the loop as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And we're getting closer to a cure, or we're very concerned about the price of drugs right now, because not street drugs, but one drug's been raised 5,000%. And we have a student at our school who is not covered. And I'm not calling to ask for money. I really want to know, what strategy do you think we need to do as a school? Because this mom needs some help figuring out how to go and get this drug for her daughter, or that sort of thing.
So you're talking about the basics of good process of staying connected with your people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
2 calls in the morning, 2 calls in the evening.
Very good.
Always.
We're talking over each other. Here I go. Tell me what this means. Always have an ongoing wish list.
If people don't know what you need,
right,
you don't get them.
Yeah, you don't get it.
And I'll give you a real simple example.
Sure.
I was on a board. This was in the early 90s, and we had this great guy in the room, and I didn't know him. He was a new board member, and I said, we need a wish list, and everyone said, yeah. And I said to the executive director, I was the board chair, what do we really need? And he said, I'll tell you what we really need. We need the potholes on all of our sites fixed, because we just had a staff person, and unfortunately we don't pay our staff well, have a broken axle.
Oh my.
And this guy said, oh, I can get that done this week. I said, what do you mean?
Was it him or his brother-in-law who was in the business?
The whole family.
The whole family.
Yes.
In the asphalt business.
Construction. And he said, when we have asphalt at the end of the day, I'll call as soon as I know something, clear the cars away. And it was all of the sites were done within 4 days.
Just by asking.
And we were talking about raising money for this, and it was just done.
It was done. That's great. Now, tell me a little bit about this here, this Good 360. And you say, remember to consider asking for goods and services rather than just money. So your example, we needed asphalt.
Sure.
Sometimes it's quicker just to go right to the source.
Yes.
Yep.
And Good 360 is a wonderful nonprofit, and they are the largest distributor of donated items in the United States.
So let me guess, they probably work with major corporations or people going out of business or bankruptcy courts and all that have supplies, that want to get
Yes.
rid of them. We're closing down a plant, we got 100 desks, and here they are.
Actually, it's brand new stuff.
Okay, tell me more.
So I'll give you an example. One of my clients works with adults with developmental disabilities. They ordered a pallet. They have housing. So they ordered a pallet of donated items, and I'm not sure. I think they came from Hallmark, but the adults with the developmental disabilities were able to go and decorate their rooms, and they're going to be decorating them for Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, their birthdays, and it's all donated goods, and it increases the quality of their lives. And up till now, their caregivers were buying decorations, and they don't have a lot of money, so now they have a very special room, and if you earn points, you can go and get a decoration for your room.
Very neat. So Halloween's coming up, but let me close here on this point. So you've worked some magic here. You've talked about both the big picture of fundraising and a lot of the details with some real life examples. What closing comments would you have for us about making your board and your staff successful in fundraising?
I call it the chess versus
chess versus
checkers.
Okay.
School of fundraising.
Okay.
And when you play the game of checkers, every piece is the same size and moves in the same direction, and there are rules. And when you play the game of chess, different pieces move in different directions, and there's still rules. Where we go wrong is we treat our board members like checkers. We expect them to do the same thing.
Right.
We expect them to give the same amount. We expect them to do the same kind of work. Where in fact, if you sit down with people and say, what are your time constraints? Right. What are you good at? Do you want to try something new? Right. Would you rather stay within your comfort zone? Treat them like chess pieces so that this can be the best board experience of their life.
Well, that's a great summation on a great topic, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. We have another slide or two here as we wrap up, just to have contacts. Anybody needs to reach out, and of course we're very grateful to BoardPack for sponsoring this. Just if I might add, with BoardPack, every good charity, whether large or small, every not-for-profit has a real opportunity to save money. If they're not using a board portal and they're not being very efficient in that process, they can save terrific money by using a great board portal, and the best one that we know of out there is BoardPack.